on my mind.
Somebody in a parachute has just landed on the edge of the ring. Holyfield bit by a dirty Mike Tyson. Fury has managed to get up.
Hello and welcome to episode 58 of the award-winning combat sports podcast, The Boxing Show, with me, your host, Rob Tebbutt. As always, I'd like to remind everybody to please like, comment and subscribe. Turn your notifications on for more boxing content. Now that's out of the way, it's just the two of us this week. I am joined by none other than Mr. Andy Clarke, of course, the author of The Knockout, available now on Amazon. We've still got it there. We're still giving you the free plug, Andy. How's it all going?
Yeah, good.
We're not joined by Mr. Barry Jones this week. I don't know what he's a very kind of suspicious man, isn't he? Sort of goes missing. I try not to ask too many questions. You get terrified of what might come back.
No, he is just inherently suspicious individual, but I think his reasoning for this one is quite transparent. It's school holidays, and I think he's home alone with his kids, so that's keeping him completely occupied, which I totally understand that.
Yeah, I'm sure he's having a blast. I'm sure he's having a whale of a time dealing with his kids at home rather than the kids in the studio today. But yeah, it's just us today. We've got a lot to get through as well. And we're going to start off in the amateur code, of course. We are a few days in now to Paris 2024. We've been watching a little bit of the I guess the rounds of 32 and rounds of 16 this morning before coming on air. It's always great. I am as kind of like proudly amateur boxing casual. I don't follow the sport sort of away from the major tournaments, but I love a bit of Olympic boxing, Andy. It's brilliant.
It's fantastic. The major tournaments are just superb, and there will never dawn a day where I don't want to go and cover it, because you have this incredible pace and intensity to it, particularly at the Olympic Games because of what's at stake, but not just in terms of the fights inside the ring, just of the whole format, because you get a fight every 15 minutes and they just keep rolling on and rolling on. And if you do get one that's a little bit dull, which is unusual, then it's over quickly. And we were talking earlier on about how it is this kind of, in the early stages, it sounds a bit bleak, but it's this kind of conveyor belt of broken dreams, because you get in there, you've got 3 rounds, you've got to make it count, 4 years in the making, you have to perform in that moment, and if you don't, decision, hand gets raised, out you go, done. It's so intense, and the standard is so good. It's just an absolute joy to watch it. You know, you could literally watch it all day, every day, and it's what I basically plan to try and do from this point onwards. I've not really been able to watch too much the first couple of days. I spent last week working as a removal man / cleaner at my wife's business, which was
Whipping
every
boy.
bit as bad as it sounds. I'm just covered in weird bruises, but it's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. We had a tough draw, GB. 3 fighters who've boxed so far have gone out. Rosie Eccles, I thought, was unlucky. I think she can feel genuinely unlucky. Charlie Davison was in a close fight. Pat Brown made it close in that final round, but it's every single fight in the Olympics is losable. That's what the standard's like. It's terrific.
Yeah, and even in this early stage so far, obviously there's not a lot to write home about, unfortunately, for Team GB or indeed Ireland, for our Irish viewers. Shout out Ireland. But there's been some big high-profile exits. Julio Cesar Cruz, somebody, of course, that we've taken a very, you know, as anybody does, kind of looks through rose-tinted glasses at. Unfortunately, out in the first round against Lauren Alfonso, former Cuban of now of Azerbaijan, or representing Azerbaijan. So it's already had a few frills and spills, hasn't it? We saw the reigning welterweight gold medalist, world champion Shimberganov. There we go. So we're getting there, the casual pronunciations. He was eliminated early on as well. So it does throw up fairly regular frills and spills, doesn't it? It's brilliant to watch.
Yeah, it does, because, as I said, the standard is really, really high, and that first round often is really important, and sometimes you'll see split scoring, and even the split of the scoring in that opening round and in all 3 rounds can be can be absolutely critical, but particularly in that opening round, because that can tee up really whether you go into a final round with a chance of being able to win, or whether you're too far down on 3 cards as opposed to 2, and then you can turn it around. It's incredibly fine margins. I mean, the Cruz is amazing. I've been really lucky to see him from ringside quite a few times, and I think Cuba might look to try and move him on now and maybe replace him, because that supersonic Cuban team, which existed for so long, of which he was a mainstay, I think he's probably just feeling it now. He's been a top international amateur for 15 years. He's won 5 World Championship golds, 2 Olympic golds, made that shift up from light heavy to heavy, which I wasn't completely sure about. They didn't really have anyone at that weight, and so it seemed fair enough to allow him to go up and see what he could do. But he had this 3-month spell where he won the Olympics and then won the World Championships, and it was just amazing to watch. And he has been immense. You know, he's something else to watch live too, because he does have that kind of Matrix style movement, as people like to describe it. So he's been mercurial. You know, that would be the word for him. But Alfonso was always going to be a tough fight. It used to be at cruiserweight, now up at heavyweight. And what you find with some of these Cuban fighters who've gone elsewhere is that they then end up in massive fights against people who caused them to go elsewhere, who were blocking their path to the team. So that always adds a really interesting dynamic to it.
There was the fight in Tokyo, wasn't there, between La Cruz and Emmanuel Reyes.
Another one, yeah.
Emmanuel Reyes now represents Spain, and that was, to be fair, the La Cruz Lauren Alfonso fight. You could tell there's a lot of respect between them when they came together, and then after the fight there was a lot of respect. Wasn't quite like that with Julio La Cruz and Emmanuel Reyes in Tokyo. There was a lot of back and forth, and that kind of adds that little extra dimension to it.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does, and it just all comes so thick and fast in the early stages, because the prelims, when you go cover these tournaments, the first few days, they're just blizzards and blizzards of fights. But like I said, it's just really enjoyable, because just of the spacing between it and how quick it all is, and just how good it is, basically. You know, it's not on the format for LA at the minute, boxing, but that situation can be solved.
They'll get it worked out, won't they?
You'd hope so, because Los Angeles want it. The IOC want boxing. They just made it very clear that they don't want either. World Boxing has been formed. We don't have time to really get into it, but it's a solvable situation. It won't be easy, but it is solvable, because it's one of the originals. You go back to the ancient Olympics, and it was one of the sports then. Not that means it has to stay in forever, because there were plenty of things that were in the Olympics then that aren't now, but it's just so good. You know, I defy anyone to come in and watch that, go to the arena, watch it on TV, and feel like that any Olympic Games could do without that. So the IOC do want it. LA will definitely want it. So I'm still quite confident about it. But it's messy. It is messy, the situation currently. But just watch the Olympics, enjoy the Olympics, because as boxing fans, you get to see the next wave of people coming through. Some of them are already pros, as we know, and often people will complain about that and say, well, it's not fair, surely. Well, you can see that it very much is fair. It's not the case that professional boxers come back in and beat up on these callow, inexperienced amateur weaklings. That is not what is happening, and it hasn't from the first point that they allowed pros in. They've done poorly. You know, Jalolov won a gold medal. Albert Batagaziev won a gold medal when he was 3-0 in Tokyo, but generally they don't do it, because even if they have done in the past, coming back to it, that format is really difficult.
Yeah, I think we saw Estelle Maselli, of course. Obviously won an Olympic gold, went pro, came back and was eliminated in the first round. Before we move things on, obviously there's a lot to catch up on and preview ahead of this weekend as well in LA. I mentioned earlier on, it's been seemingly a bit of a graveyard for favourites at the minute. I mean, I think the 3 or 4 of the top gold medal favourites at heavyweight are now all out. The welterweight favourite is out. But there's still, obviously, Jalolov at super heavyweight. I mean, Kizhniak, somebody we've spoken about, who we're all eager to see. Who are your ones to look out for in the Olympics? Who are your gold medal kind of hunches?
So I really like Uzbek fighter at 63.5. So like welter Ruslan Abdullayev.
We watched him this morning, didn't we?
Yeah, he's really good. He's just really good. It's as simple as that, and he's really good to watch too. He kind of came through winning a gold medal at the Asian Championships a couple of years ago, then won the Senior World Championships in Uzbekistan in 2023, which was weakened by the fact that GB and some other countries weren't there. America weren't there either. But he beat Hofhannes Batchkov on his way to the final, which he was like 21-22 at the time. He's a really good fighter. So look out for him, because not many people know an awful lot about him. There's a Kazakh in the lower weights, flyweight, Sabir Khan, who's just a little buzzsaw of a fighter. I'm a fan of him. But just the quality throughout is it's as I said before, it's tremendous. It really is.
We'll be looking out for Alexander Kizhniak. He's the one that I'm doing. If you're like me, you don't really know an awful lot about amateur boxing, check out Alexander Kizhniak. Always one worth keeping an eye on. But that's enough of our Olympic segment. Remember, that is coming thick and fast. You can catch that on Discovery Plus, free plug for them. But let's look back at this past weekend, Andy. There was a lot of boxing, and starting in the heavyweight division, Joe Joyce against Derek Chisora, and an upset. Derek Chisora, I'm not sure about rolling back the years. I think the years were still very much there. I don't think he necessarily rolled them back, but produced a typical Derek Chisora performance, albeit this one resulting in a big win.
Massive, absolutely massive win. And just watching him put that shift in during the fight, I didn't think he was quite going to get there. I had it 4-4 through 8. My card was basically the same as Fabio Wardley's, I think. I had 4-1 Chisora at halfway, but those kinds of fights are they're not easy to score, because you're looking for who does the most effective punching. How much weight do you give to a massive shot that lands clean but that seemingly doesn't really have that much effect? How much do you give to a punch that's nowhere near as eye-catching and doesn't seem anything like as heavy but does seem to have an effect? And that's what you were kind of trying to weigh up. And it's not that easy a thing to do. And I felt like Joyce would close it out with a couple of rounds to go. And then the knockdown was massive. The knockdown changed everything, because that was a round that Joyce was maybe winning, and then all of a sudden he's lost it 10-8. And I guess that's the lesson, isn't it? You can't just keep walking onto massive punches, because against Zhang, he got properly knocked down and stopped. And the facial damage in the first fight. And although he got up straight away from Chisora's punch and didn't seem bothered by it, it meant that he lost around 10-8. And that basically lost him the fight. And it was kind of extraordinary to watch. And Chisora, you look at that list of fighters that he's lost to, the names on that are pretty incredible. So seeing him win a big one like this, it's always that tale of two sides, isn't it? Where you're happy for him, but for Joyce, I mean, where does he go now? What does he do now? It's tough for him. It
very much is. Obviously, after the fight, Joe Joyce said that he doesn't feel like, he feels like he will carry on. He still, in his words, feels fresh. But he's now, he's had 3 losses in his last 4. The win came against, Cash Ali, who, with respect to him, is significantly below the level that Joe Joyce would want to be operating at. And then he's lost to Derek Chisora, who has, 2 wins in his last 6 going into the fight. Both, close, controversial wins over Kubrat Pulev and Gerald Washington. It is difficult to see where Joyce goes from here now. We'll come on to talk about him, but Moses Itauma on the undercard. If you're Joe Joyce, you get served up to Moses Itauma. If you're Joe Joyce, you're used to, go back 18 months ago, he's talking about boxing for unified titles, and he's right on the cusp of a world title shot. 18 months later, to be kind of seemingly fed, not to be disrespectful to a young budding prospect, is a quite dramatic fall from grace. It's difficult to put your finger on a moment or where that's gone. Could it be, a culmination of the shots that he's taken as a pro? He had a conversation with somebody over the weekend about the Joseph Parker fight. When you consider the career trajectory since the Joseph Parker fight, they've both gone in opposite directions, and the opposite directions of what you would have thought.
Yeah, they have. And I think it is exactly what you just said there. I think it's an accumulation of the punches that he's taken over the course of his pro career. That there are certain things certain truisms which never get disproved. And one is that you just can't be that easy to hit. And I think maybe we all got slightly carried away with it and began to think that maybe he was that guy who actually could just shrug punches off in a way that nobody had ever really been able to do before, that chin wouldn't crack. But inevitably, it didn't prove to be the case. And you just can't get hit like that with that regularity. You just can't. And against Zhang, who's a really heavy puncher, high-level fighter, he paid the price for it. And against Chisora, again, it was the fact that he got hit one time too many with that big overhand right that put him on his back that lost him the fight. And it boils down to that, essentially. I haven't always felt like it needed to quite be that way, because I always go to that fight against Dubois as evidence that he hasn't always been too easy to hit. But too often he has been. And watching that Chisora fight, halfway through, it kind of reminded me of the Takam fight a bit. And I thought it might go that way because Takam was well up at halfway. But the punches he was landing weren't having any effect on Joyce. And then Joyce forced a stoppage himself. Takam complained that it was a bit premature, but he forced a stoppage. And that was what was happening then, but it's not what's happening now. And you can't see him changing, can you, in terms of the way he goes about things? And I understand why he'll want to continue, but I think he is looking at that kind of fight that he'll be offered next. People will look at him and just think, yeah, he's a good name to get on my record. He's very, very tough. He's going to take me some rounds. Let's see if we can get Joe Joyce. That's where he is. It's a tough spot to be in.
It is, and you go back to that Daniel Dubois fight. I mean, we've kind of spoken about it on here various times. You know, the Jugger jab, the Joe Joyce jab, and how well that worked that night. And then indeed against Joseph Parker, I thought against Joseph Parker he was fantastic. Again, he took a load of shots, but you know, in that type of fight where he sort of put the pressure on, you're going to take some. But I thought his movement in that fight, I thought his jab was very good. It was varied. It was for me the best we've seen him. And then in his last few fights, even against Chisora, he couldn't really get the jab going. There didn't seem to. I mean, you know, I don't think explosive or kind of pace through his work is necessarily something that you always attribute to Joyce. But even in the Takam fight, where Takam was having success, when Joyce got to him, he then sort of went through the gears.
Yeah.
Gear 1 to gear 2, but still he went through the gears and got rid of him.
Yeah.
Whereas against Chisora, there were moments where he had Chisora going, and Chisora's that wily fox. He did it against Joseph Parker, particularly in the rematch, where he gets hurt and he kind of just retreats to the ropes and just rolls, and then obviously in the 9th round found a shot off the ropes. But you just never really saw Joyce. It was that same pace throughout, which we've seen from him in the past, but it never looked like it could go any higher, and he never really had any snap in any of his shots. And even when he hurt Chisora, he didn't seem to force it. And you just wonder now, he's in the late knockings of his 30s, he's 38. It's difficult to see how he rebounds from that and isn't just served up as an opponent to an Itauma or a Wardley or somebody like that. It really is quite the fall from grace.
It is. I was at that fight against Joseph Parker, and that was a great fight and a great finish as well. And it is kind of amazing to think what's happened to the pair of them since then. And we all applauded him at the time, Joyce, for taking that fight with Zhang, because he didn't need to. He had his lofty ranking. He could have just looked after that in a way that Hrgović kind of did for a while before he lost to Dubois, and just sit in really and wait for your opportunity. But he didn't want to do that, and that was great. I was bang up for that. And at the time I remember thinking, isn't it great that he's willing to give Zhang this fight, because Zhang had been a bit unlucky probably against Hrgović, and then you felt like he might get frozen out. It's just a really good thing for the sport. I remember thinking that at the time, but looking back on it now, obviously looking back on it now, it's a mistake, because he lost twice in a row. But with fighters particularly, aura can be critical, can't it? And if you've got an aura around you that you cannot be hurt, that you're indestructible, that everybody has a plan until they punch me in the face and nothing happens, which is what he said ahead of that first fight with Zhang. that can be very, very powerful. But if it gets fractured, if that force field gets penetrated, then you can have a really big problem. And you see it with somebody like Wilder. If you lose the ability to drop bombs as the bronze bomber, which he appears to have done, he just can't find a home for that right hand anymore. I'm sure the power's still there, but he can't detonate it. Then all of a sudden, you're just a man, aren't you, like anybody else? And I think that's probably what has happened with Joyce. And whether he feels it, I expect he probably does. Be very difficult to get an honest answer out of him about that until he's a few years retired, probably. But the people in front of him now, they won't have that, not quite resignation, but they won't have that thought in their mind that, God, this is going to be 12 rounds because there's no way I'm going to be able to stop this guy. I'm not going to be able to make a dent in this guy. This is going to be a real hard night's work. And in the end, you kind of can find yourself almost cooperating with the script because it's difficult to see how you can deviate from it. That's not the case anymore, really.
No, it's not. And you'd be looking at that and thinking, I can get to this guy, and when I get to him, he can go, and he can slow down, and all of the stuff that we were talking about with the jab beforehand, we haven't really seen any evidence of it now for a long time. It's been a while since he's gone for a fight really kind of unscathed. I mean, pre-Daniel Dubois, he boxed Michael Wallish. He went unscathed against Michael Wallish. But really, since then, I mean, Dubois, he boxed really well, but he did take some shots. Takam was a hard fight until he got the stoppage. I didn't think he looked great against Christian Hammer. Barry always kind of references that as, what happened there. Like Christian Hammer was landing and seemingly getting an effect. Joseph Parker fight, obviously, we've already discussed. And then the two Zhilei Zhang losses. So, yeah, very... Not a great form guide for the Juggernaut. It's going to be interesting to see where he goes next, as it will be for Derek Chisora, who, of course, now rumbles on. The war train continues. He continues to kind of make a mockery of all of us, really, who continue to write him off over the years. He's now said he's got 2 more fights left. Who could you see those fights being against? It was talk of a trilogy bout with Dillian Whyte. I'm not sure what Dillian Whyte's current situation is with boxing in the UK after the VADA test ahead of the Anthony Joshua rematch. That didn't happen. Is that the sort of fight, the sort of level? I mean, obviously, big kind of caveat to that is we want to make sure that everybody's clear and able to box, which Chisora reminded everybody after the fight. But that would be kind of in the same keeping of a Joe Joyce fight. I mean, even with respect to a Gerald Washington and a Kubrat Pulev, where it's 2 guys who maybe don't have many other options aside from kind of running it back with an old dance partner. Yeah, I think so. I think that would be, as you say, everything being all legit and above board. I think that would be a great option for him because it would sell. People would be interested in that because you look at those two, they're big names. People know who they are. Outside of boxing, people know who they are. And you look at that fight night on Saturday, and we were talking about this before we hit record. Fair dues to Queensberry because that is an expensive fight night they put on there because Joyce and Chisora are going to need to get paid plenty. There was never any murmurings about them wanting to try and put that on pay-per-view or anything. O2 as well, or anything like that. The O2, the atmosphere looked good, the crowd looked good. We'll get on some of the other fights, but that was an expensive Saturday fight night to give the fans. And Whyte Chisora is a similar kind of fight. I'd watch that. I'd absolutely watch that. And I think for Chisora, he did take a lot of stick again on Saturday. And there's no escaping that. He won, and this is boxing. You're going to get hit. You can't be squeamish about it. We can't be squeamish about it. But at the same time, off the back of that, you don't want to hear people saying, well, he's a contender again now. Let's get him in with Zhang or someone like that. I don't want to see that because I feel like I do know what would happen. And it's not something that I would particularly want to watch. I don't think there's any particular merit in that. What he has absolutely earned in the hardest way possible, Chisora, throughout his career, if he does just have 2 more left, and I hope that is the case, that you just get him the right fights. Yeah. If he wins them both, then he's going to want to keep going. But you can't think about it in those terms. I think Dillian Whyte would be, I think that'd be great. Because those first 2 fights were tremendous. They were absolutely tremendous. I was at both of them. And yeah, if Dillian Whyte is able to box, I don't know what the situation is with all of that, then
then that's the right kind of thing for him. I'm sure that plenty of people at ringside on Saturday would be thinking to themselves, right, well, Itauma against Chisora actually would now be a great fight, because you could really, really build that.
I don't want to see that. Oh, don't want to see that.
But you can see the train of thought.
Yeah, absolutely. You could see the train of thought. I mean, I completely agree with what you said there. And Chisora, I think, in the hardest way possible, has managed to earn his own right, as all fighters do, really, to be able to kind of put an end to his career however he wants. But it is about getting those right fights. And I think the fact that I've been taking the Tyson Fury fight out, which was a bit of an outlier, and I don't think anybody necessarily saw that one coming. When you're looking at Pulev, Washington, Joyce, White, those types of guys, it is people on, I'd say, the back nine, some of them on the back three or two or three.
Yeah.
Quite different when you're talking about somebody like an Itauma or even a Wardley or somebody like that who's fresh and young and hits hard. And it's about getting that
Derek
right
as well.
opponent.
He's I don't claim to know him at all. I've been at loads of his fights now, seen him around a lot, but he's not an idiot.
No,
like he's not going to be afraid of anyone. No one's scared, right, at that kind of level. But people talk about someone trying to avoid someone else and all the rest of it. It's all politics. Nobody's scared. They would all take any fight, particularly him. But he will look at something like that and just think, look, we all know what the script is here. We all know what the plan is here. You're mugging me off, basically. If you want to mug me off with a big satchel full of cash, fine, but there's going to need to be a lot in it, which would mean that it wouldn't happen. Yeah,
absolutely. And before we move on, where next for Joe Joyce?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure, to be honest. They've got to get him a win. His next fight would have to be a win if they wanted to rebuild or try and regenerate, or you just throw him almost into a kind of make or break. You take that fight against someone like Itauma, realising that that's where you are, but knowing that if you could beat him with all the hype and noise, justifiably so, around him, then that can maybe catapult you back into somewhere near where you want to be. But it was kind of unthinkable for him, really, to lose that fight on Saturday. But lose it he did, and he did lose. There was no debate about that, because to win after the knockdown, he needed to have won 6 rounds, and that was, no one was ever going to turn in that card, I don't think.
No. Okay, moving on and staying with the heavyweight division, we've just mentioned his name a few times there. Moses Itauma made a statement, Andy. We all kind of preempted it, we all predicted it before the fight, that maybe he would do to Marius Vach what no other man had done and get him out of there before the start of the 6th round, and he did so, siving him down inside 2 rounds. And really, people can say what they want about Marius Vach's 44. No one's done that to him. No one's come close to doing that to him. And at 19 years old, Moses Itauma looks to be coming for it all at heavyweight.
He absolutely does. And I just remember looking at Marius Vach, pardon me, at the end of the 1st round, and it was written on his face, oh no. This guy, I kind of heard that this guy is supposed to be really good, blah, 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 blah. And actually, it turns out he is. And you could see that he knew that this was going to be painful. It was just a question of how long could he hang in there for, and the answer was not that long. And he is everything that everybody says he is, and everybody you speak to about Itauma, they all say the same thing, just like everybody you speak to about Whittaker basically says the same thing, which is that they're really, really, really good. And I've not really found anyone who said anything about Itauma other than that. And you have to listen to it. And then he's backed it up in the ring. And you were saying a couple of weeks ago that outside of Fury, Usyk, Joshua, and maybe Zhang, there's nobody else that you wouldn't put him in with. And I completely agree with that. I was thinking about it during the week, actually. Off the back of Saturday, I just think, yeah, absolutely. Ideally, you get those fights that season a fighter, and you get against this style and against that style, and maybe you have a head clash that causes you some problems, or a cut, and you go through all this stuff. But with some people, you just can't. It's not possible. because there isn't anybody out there who's really going to be able to stand up to it.
Well, give him Marius Vach. You know what I mean? Like, exactly that. That's what Saturday was supposed to be. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think it was made with a view to getting the stoppage and comparing to Fraser Clarke, but it wasn't supposed to go in a round and a half.
No, it really wasn't. It was, can he find a way through? Does he hit hard enough? Has he got enough variety? I mean, we thought before Saturday that the answer to all those questions, given what we'd already seen, was yes. But sometimes you see something a bit different when they're in with somebody like Vach, who's huge and also pretty good generally. It's just kind of riding punches a little bit and taking the sting off them. But he just couldn't do it. He couldn't do a single thing with Itauma. And it will be absolutely fascinating to see what they do with him now, because people are going to want paying an awful lot of money to fight him.
We discussed it in the build-up to the fight. In fact, he's now, I think he's officially the mandatory for the English title, which is held by Sol Dacres. We discussed, making an English title fight for X amount of money is going to be very, very difficult. And also, I mean, I think he was number 10 with the WBO. He's got like a WBO Intercontinental, I think. He was number 10 before the weekend. So I don't think he fights around English level, British title level. Name that we mentioned last week, which I really like, is Jermaine Franklin.
Yeah,
people
that
think about
for him, I think.
Jermaine Franklin against Anthony Joshua, and obviously against Dillian Whyte. I felt like certainly against Anthony Joshua was ahead, pretty much the whole way, and it maybe wasn't Joshua's best performance, but Franklin was in there making him think. He's an experienced guy. He's an American, kind of very cute American style. Does a few things quite subtly.
It'll bring that American vibe about him as well, which is kind of like, who's this young English guy? Who cares? Like, you're all giving him the big one. So what?
And if you can do a job on him after Joshua didn't stop him, and many people felt that he was unfortunate against Dillian Whyte. It is a good yardstick. So I quite like that. I can't see him entertain. I mean, I know Frank Warren was talking about Fraser Clarke. Again, if you're Fraser Clarke and you've got the opportunity to box Fabio Wardley, which is, by the sounds of things, the fight that's going to happen for him next, that's a fight that you can make plenty of money in. Why are you going to fight a young 19-year-old who doesn't really bring anything to the table other than people are starting to get on the bandwagon, but it's still not going to generate enough money for that type of level fight for you to go, I'll fight him? Because if you're a Fraser Clarke, or Fabio Wardley, slightly younger than Fraser Clarke, but similar sort of level, what do you get by losing to a 19-year-old? If you're Sol Dacres, again, he's probably going to get a career high payday, but it's probably going to be the last one you get for a little while if you lose that fight in spectacular fashion. If you get beaten a round or two, it's the value that it takes off your career moving forwards. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they do with it. But I still feel, as we mentioned in the build up to it, I think it will be somebody else next. Who that is, I don't know. And I think they will try and do the Joe Joyce fight. And I think by April, May next year, and it's May next year where it's, that's the Mike Tyson record, and people talk about, it's marketing, they're not really thinking about it. He's not that far away. He goes and beats a Jermaine Franklin or someone of that ilk in October, then goes and beats Joe Joyce in December or January. Joseph Parker is the WBO interim champion. Whatever happens with Fury versus Usyk in December, you could see Joseph Parker elevated into full champion, and you could see Joseph Parker of Queensberry Promotions against Moses Itauma of Queensberry Promotions for the WBO heavyweight title, April, May next year.
It's not out of the question, and the fact that the belts have been held up, if you like, by the quest for undisputed, which has now been resolved. That, allied with the fact that it just seemed quite unlikely that somebody would be able to beat that record, made me feel like it definitely wasn't going to happen. But actually, it's not impossible that could happen. And the main ingredient in that is him. Because never mind what's going on elsewhere with politics and timings and all the rest of it, if you don't feel that the fighter's got the ability to do that, but they're still going to go on and be very good potentially, then you just forget about that, because you could ruin them. But you look at him now and you do just think, okay, that's like, no disrespect to Joseph Parker. I don't think he'll take any by it, because he'll have seen Itauma and he'll absolutely feel that he can beat him. But, this is a guy who does seem to have kind of the full package, really. And it's always just, it's great when someone turns pro with a massive rep. And it turns out that there's just the chance that it could really be justified. And maybe he is what we're always wanting. Any country in the world is always wanting, is a top heavyweight, a heavyweight on the rise, because that is the division that defines the health of the sport overall. And personality-wise, I think he could kind of grow into it too. He's not really too bothered about getting out there and selling himself. But again, that's not because he hasn't got anything to say, I think, or because he lacks personality or anything like that. I think it's because he's one of these people who is that kind of confident in himself that he feels like he doesn't really need to say too much. And in that regard, you develop him as this is just kind of like brooding mayhem machine, don't you? Which so far is exactly what he's been.
He started to come out of his shell a little bit, it feels like, in some of his last... He was saying into the camera, all the people who said about, I've made a statement, all the people doubting me. I was like, I don't think there's many people doubting me out there, but whatever floats your boat, whatever gets you in the mindset that you need to. I think everyone's pretty much on board. But we kind of discussed this before the show, on last week's show, before the fights. He has that something different. The way he boxes is very, very different to those other guys, sort of take Fury and Usyk out of it, and Usyk, cruiserweight moving up. Over the last 15, 20 years, it's been, big, tall heavyweights, jab and grab, set up the right hand, 1-2, left hook. It's not been the most sexy to watch at times, whereas he is very, very different. Like, hands are down. He's a reactive fighter. He's got all the shots in the book. He can loop the left hand. He can throw it straight. He can throw it to the body. Uppercuts. He can lead with it. He can do a bit of everything. And when you look at the rest of what we said before the show, when we were on here last week, there aren't that many people who can do what he can do in the division. And it is just a case of him ticking those boxes and trying to get somebody to land on him just so you can see what happens. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting. But I do think Jermaine Franklin would be pretty good. Someone around that ilk I do quite like. Right, okay, and moving on, there is a few other bits that we're going to discuss. Again, really, really good card. I mean, we could go through really all of it, but we're not going to, because we've got another big card this weekend. The hits keep coming in the boxing industry, which we're very, very pleased about. As will be Dennis McCann, who produced a career best performance and really dominating Unat Baluta in a way that I think only Liam Davies has really come close to doing in the past, but got, I guess, rid of that blemish, if you want to call it such, a technical draw last August against Unat Baluta, and a very, very good clinical performance really from Dennis McCann. Yeah,
I don't think he could have performed much better, to be honest. I mean, maybe forcing the stoppage would have been the ideal thing to do, and you could argue that he could have done that courtesy of the corner maybe pulling Baluta out, because it was clear from quite a long way out that he was losing every round and he couldn't turn it around. He wasn't going to be able to win, and that all awaited him was further punishment. And in that situation, why doesn't the corner just pull him out? I was kind of thinking that with a few rounds to go. Anthony Crolla said it at the end, and I made him right. But that's a kind of minor talking point from the context of what we saw. He was really good. And it's great to see that level of improvement in a short space of time. I know we had the fight in between against the same person, who is basically the same as he was the first time they boxed. And McCann is not the same as the first time they boxed. So I don't think it could really have gone any better, to be honest. It was, the second fight with Joe McNally and Declan O'Rourke. And I know that not every result that they've had, that gym, has gone their way. But you look at the people who have gone to them, it's not a coincidence, is it? There's a reason for it. That the stable that they've got there now is really, pretty impressive. And McCann, it was without doubt a career best performance.
It certainly was, and I mean, fair play to Baluta, who hung in there. I mean, he really is unbelievably tough, isn't he?
He is, and he was always throwing back. I mean, and I can understand why. The referee's not going to stop it, probably, because he's always throwing back and always trying to get something done. But he's the very definition of somebody, Baluta, of a fighter who needs to be saved from himself. And he would have hated it if the corner would have pulled him out. But at the same time, if you're going to think about the sort of longevity that a fighter's going to have when they have, beyond any shadow of a doubt, proven their toughness. If you yank him 3 rounds from the end after 9 rounds, or say maybe 10, no one's going to turn around and say, "Oh, he wanted out. He whispered in the trainer's ear." No one's saying that. They're actually probably giving the corner a bit of a pat on the back and just saying, "Listen, you did something there that you knew he wasn't going to like, but you did the right thing.
Yeah, it's interesting to see. Well, I'm just having a look through the rankings. Obviously, there's that huge fight with Liam Davies, a former European champion. He likes to remind Dennis McCann that you're only winning these belts because I'm vacating them. Which a lovely bit of shithousery.
We talked about it the other week, and I love that fight. I think it was so good, and I know that. Yeah, there's all sorts of, reasons and posturing and, you're beneath me. Well, yeah, you're getting my cast-offs and all the rest of it. I don't want to fight you. And maybe you don't want to do it right now, but it's one, it could brew a little bit longer, couldn't it? But it's just such a good fight.
Yeah, obviously Liam Davies has have they got a rescheduled date for the Shabazz Masood fight yet, or is it being announced? I don't think it's been officially announced. Yeah. It looks as though they're still going to lock horns, which again I'm all for. Yeah. That's a great fight, a really good stylistic matchup as well. But then you think we asked about the having stock in a certain fighter or one of those three: Shabazz Masood, Dennis McCann, or Liam Davies. Dennis McCann's stock very much went up this past weekend. So that is a potential, whether or not they can, as is often the case, people, for a world title or get a world title on the line. And you can see where, people may think that. But, at super bantamweight, it's going to probably be a little while before you're going to get a world title open up. Of course, held by a certain Naoya Inoue. But fantastic performance from Dennis McCann, who continues to go from strength to strength at super bantamweight. Another fight on the card, the final one that we're going to discuss. Again, we've got plenty to look ahead to. Was Ryan Garner against Archie Sharp. Now, a fight that I think took a lot of people by surprise when you consider Archie Sharp, his lofty ranking with the WBO, and he's kind of, while not boxing for a British title, was part of that good little super featherweight mix-up that they had at Queensbury a few years ago. Whereas Ryan Garner, as we mentioned beforehand, had a bit of a stop-start pro career, undoubtedly talented, and a very good fight this past weekend. Was pretty nip and tuck until around the middle stages, I felt, when Ryan Garner, I think the heavier shots just started to make an impression on Archie Sharp.
Yeah, that's exactly what I saw, and it was kind of what we thought we may well see. He started well, Archie Sharp. As Frampton pointed out on commentary, boxing the way that he boxes, staying up on your toes and using that kind of movement is a really difficult thing to do for the duration, and particularly when you've got somebody in front of you who's now got that bit of patience and maturity about them where they just stick to the method, stick to the task. They've got good enough feet themselves to kind of cover off your movement and make it hard for you to keep doing that. They're not just following you around, and bit by bit they get to you. And as the fight wore on, the point at which Garner would get to Sharp in a round got earlier and earlier, didn't it? That's essentially what happened. And I said the other week that I really enjoy those kinds of fights where you do feel like you know what's going to happen.
Where's the tipping point?
Yeah, but where's the tipping point? That's I think I'm always keen to watch one of them. And it's a massive win for Garner, who kind of, after the renaissance that he's had, this is his second chance. He self-destructed the first time around, but he learnt plenty from that, and he's come back into the sport just a much more mature kind of performer, because he knows that this is it. You get one shot, when you're young, and you need to cash it in and make sure that you do absolutely everything so you can walk away, whatever happens, with no regrets. And that's the vibe he gives you, isn't it? That somebody who is aware of that, that is something that he carries around with him. It doesn't weigh him down, but he knows. And it's always good when someone knows that, you can't leave any stone unturned, because I've got some ability here and I need to go as far as I can. And really, whether I do or not is down to me. That the things that I can control, that is down to me. And that's obviously what he's learned.
Well, thankfully he has, because as we've kind of alluded to there and in the past, it's taken him a long time. He's been a pro 8 years now.
Yeah,
he's 26. He turned pro in June of 2016.
You can make some mistakes when you turn pro when you're young. That's another kind of lesson. So and maybe you wouldn't make them if you turn pro later, but it's there was time. There was time.
Absolutely, but that time was running out. And if you look at kind of up until up until really his last couple of fights. You know, he had those good 10 rounds of Liam Dillon, which would have done him the world of good earlier on this year in May, and then going into that Archie Sharp fight. But even still, like, both of those fights in their own way are somewhat of a leap of faith from Frank Warren. But I remember just kind of looking through which fight it was. I remember being at York Hall for the Lester Cantillano fight in February of 2018, which was on the undercard of Zelfa Barrett against Ronnie Clarke and Anthony Yard against Tony Avalon. And I remember he came on after, he was afloat and came on after the main event. I remember watching, and I was sat next to Frank Warren at the time, and I remember, as Frank does, and people will know, and you'll certainly know from being near him, he does sort of, to borrow a football term, he heads every ball and kicks every ball with guys he's very excited about. I remember kind of the excitement that he had about Ryan Garner, and that was 6 years ago. And I think after that, he'd had various other incidents and issues outside of the ring after that. So Frank he has done, he's shown in, I mean, it was one of the kind of nice little asides from the 5v5 with, Willie Hutchinson and Daniel Dubois and, different situations. But Ryan Garner, if Frank believes in you as a prospect, even if you do have those bumps in the road, he does show that backing. And it looks as though now with Ryan Garner, who's always had the talent, I mean, you kind of go back and you hear stories about him and his ability in the ring and his ability to get himself in trouble outside of the ring that sort of plagued him and followed him through his amateur career. But it looks as though, I think it was you who mentioned in the preview show, that he seems to have a good woman who won't stand for any of his nonsense, which is good. Everybody needs that in their life, I think. And sometimes
you need that person, don't
you?
You
need that person.
He's just going to call you out and just say, listen, if this is how it's going to be, I'm off.
And he has that, and you can tell by the way that he's boxed in his last couple of fights. And all of a sudden, albeit he's had 16 fights in 8 years, it seems to be picking up some momentum for him now. He's now had 3 fights in less than a year. Obviously, those 2 10-round fights with Liam Dillon and Archie Sharp. And when you consider where Archie Sharp was in the WBO rankings, I think it was number 1 or was there or thereabouts for a long time, calling out the likes of Shakur Stevenson, etc. A win for Ryan Garner there. Now, that puts him, certainly a fringe world level guy. I mean, his next opponent, it's going to be interesting to see again where they kind of look to put him. Dillon and then Archie Sharp, you'd think sort of another European-ish level guy, and potentially somebody who can give you some rounds sort of in and around, hovering around that world title level. Maybe somebody a little bit longer in the tooth, an experienced guy. But he's got that platform now. He's got that foundation that, in an ideal world, he may have got 4 or 5 years ago if he'd have kind of knuckled down, but learning the lessons from that. And he's now found himself eventually at the position whereby at 26 and you're knocking on the kind of fringes of world title, sort of made up for lost time a lot. In the last 3 or 4 months with those Liam Dillon wins and Archie Sharp wins, he's almost kind of put himself back to where he should have been, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, he has. That's exactly what's happened. And it's been good work and good matching, and he's delivered, and they've
it has to be like a significant show of faith, because considering everything that he'd done before that, you'd be forgiven for sort of thinking, he's one that's not going to work. We've got this, we've got that. They've done a really good job with sort of reviving his blue chip prospect career. Yeah,
they have, and the foundation seems solid now. That you don't feel like having got to, to mix up my metaphors, having got to base camp, he's all of a sudden going to disappear in a gust of wind and tumble back down to the bottom of the mountain. I don't think that's going to happen. He's got his feet kind of like rooted, and off the back of those performances will feel good. This is where I am. This is where I belong for now. This has been done the right way. I've not cut any corners. And I deserve to be here, and I can go higher than this. The self-belief will be there now in a way that only comes through having kind of walked the walk. And you don't always see fighters do it, because you can rise through rankings rapidly with some clever promoting, with the ability to take advantage of situations of politics and all the rest of it, and you can find yourself at a level where no one really knows whether that's where you are or not. But if you have the fights, then it's different, isn't it? And he's had the fights.
I'm just going through here if we look at what's next for Ryan Garner. Obviously, he made the defence of the WBC International, so one would think that he gets a top 15 ranking with the WBC. After that, Archie Sharp was, before this past weekend, sat pretty at number 4, I believe it was. Just moved back to the cruiserweight division. He's certainly not in there. He was number 3 with the WBO. So if you're
he'll take that ranking, won't he? Basically.
If you're Ryan Garner, you'll pick up a WBC ranking, most likely be ranked by the WBO, even if it was a WBC fight. And all of a sudden, you kind of if you look at 130 pounds and some of the guys that are in those rankings at WBC, you've got Michael Magnesi. Sort of, we kind of know a little bit about him. Obviously,
that'd be a good fight for him.
Yeah,
actually.
good fight. And then there was another name that I kind of plucked from my mind as a potential good fight for him. There's Kenichi Ogawa, of course, former world champion, knocked out by Joe Cordina. And then there was another one, which I've forgotten, but I thought, that would be a good one. Zelfa Barrett. Samir Ziani was the name. Somebody like that around European level. I think that's a good little fight. And he's somebody who, as we saw against Alex Dilmagani, upset the apple cart there. Those type of guys now where you can really, so I don't want to say bed in. I'm sure he's not going to want to waste time around there. But now you've got those 2 good wins at sort of English and then British level. You would imagine with Archie Sharp. Bedding in and sort of testing the waters, and then maybe having a couple of fights around European level at super featherweight could be best for him.
Yeah, I think so. I think Ziani, Magnesi, I think those are exactly the right kinds of fights for him. I think they're kind of ideal for him, really. Either one of them. I'd probably go Magnesi over Ziani. Yeah,
Magnesi is a good fighter, very entertaining fighter. When he came over and he boxed Anthony Kakachi, didn't he? That was a really good fight. I think that might have been on the Parker Joyce.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. I did that fight. It was a good fight.
Yeah, that was a very good fight. A few other little bbits and pieces from this past weekend just to touch upon before we move on to the preview section. Of course, there was a win for Sean Noakes. Really good fight with Inder Bassi. I think it was for the Southern area for the English title. Raven Chapman with a win this past weekend. Brandon Lee made his Queensberry debut with an 8-round win. And of course, a win for Adam Hamed, who went the distance for the first time in his professional career in his Queensberry debut against Georgi Velichkov. If you're listening to us here, that brings to an end the review section of today's show. We're going to go on to the preview section for Crawford versus Madrimov now. So if you're listening, go and find the second part of it. If you're watching, you get to see all of this. Number one, congratulations to you. We're just going to carry on here and look ahead to this weekend, the return of Terence Crawford as he takes on Israil Madrimov in LA. Obviously a Riyadh season event, the first exploration into the American market, and is headlined by a terrific fight, Andy. Terence Crawford against Israil Madrimov for the WBA super welterweight title. This is a real fight and a very, very good card this weekend in LA.
It is. You look at the fights they put on this, and it's every single one of them really gets you going because they're going to be very, very interesting. And Crawford stepping up to 154, which is exactly what we thought would happen. We feel like if he wins against Madrimov, he's probably going to jump up another stone and box Canelo at 168. That seems fairly certain to happen, you would imagine. But as you say, this is a real fight because Madrimov is a good fighter. I thought that performance against Kubanov was a very good performance last time out. I fancied him to win that fight. But having said that, the way that he did it, how quick and clinical and efficient it was really impressive. And he's come through that Uzbek amateur system where he did plenty as an amateur. He did actually attempt what Jalolov has done and is still doing. He went back into the Asian Championships in 2019 when Jalolov went back in. And the idea was that he would go deep, qualify for the World Championships and keep it going and have the two things run concurrently. But he got knocked out in the quarterfinals, which wasn't good enough to qualify for the World Championships. And so that train for him derailed there and then, whereas Jalolov has kept going. But it's been a good thing for his pro career because, as we've seen with Jalolov, doing both at a really high level can't really be done because you have to take these breaks out to qualify for tournaments and boxing them essentially, or that's sort of a bit of a sidebar. But he's a very good, solid fighter, Israil Madrimov. I do expect Terence Crawford to beat him, but as you say, this is a proper fight. It's a meaningful fight.
I think for Madrimov, and obviously we'll talk about Terence Crawford shortly, I think the timeline of that's very interesting because for me, and I think a lot of people expected a lot from Madrimov when he turned pro. It was kind of the very lazy comparisons to him and Gennady Golovkin because they were sort of the same weight and they sort of had a East.
I mean, he was really highly ranked with the WBA after a handful of fights.
He had a 10-rounder in his first fight, didn't he?
Yeah, pre-COVID he was on the brink of a world title fight.
And then he had those two fights with Michelle Sorrow. Obviously knocked out Michelle Sorrow after the bell.
Yeah.
And then had the rematch. But kind of around that sort of time, I look for his bits and pieces here. Eric Walker, which was in August of 2020. I felt like after that, really, I mean, they had the Emily Colombo fight, and anybody who's seen Emily Colombo fight, it's like the world's biggest 154 pounder. He's like a cruiser. He reminded me of like R.M. Barkley. Barkley used to make middleweight, and he was just like this absolute monster. I mean, just signed with Billy Nelson, actually, Emily Colombo. I don't know where Billy gets these random fighters from, but good fighter anyway. Around that period of time, you could just start to see him just take it a little bit slower. I felt like in his early days, Madrimov, there was a lot of movement. He was jumping around the ring and he was walking into shots, and it was all a little bit, it was difficult to follow, wasn't it? But it just feels like, you mentioned the Kurbanov fight, his last 3 or 4 fights, Madrimov, he's just slowed it down a little bit, been a little bit more deliberate. And it's worked for him, and certainly in somebody like him who's in the prime of his career, is 29 years of age, he's had X amount of 100 amateur fights. A fighter that's continually improving is a dangerous fighter. And if he continues to improve from the Kurbanov fight, and Kurbanov, a very well thought of fighter, obviously we saw him at the very close fight with Liam Smith, and he beat Patrick Teixeira, another former world champion. And I think the most impressive thing about Madrimov is he looked like he beat him in second gear. He looked like if he had to, he could have raised the levels, and potentially it was a fight where, if it may have happened a couple of years prior, we may have seen Madrimov doing X, Y, and Z and jumping around the ring, but he just worked with what was working, got him out of there, and really packed up the belt and went home. And that's a scary proposition for anybody, particularly somebody who's moving up in weight, as Crawford has done. I mean, he looked sensational at welterweight, knocked out everybody that he boxed, but it is uncharted territory for him. And as much as he's got one eye on Canelo Alvarez, we've seen him, and particularly on the Saudi shows, when they have something that's lined up, it doesn't always work out that way. Not that we're necessarily suggesting that Terence Crawford, somebody takes his eye off the ball. I'm sure he's not, and I'm sure he's fully focused on Israil Madrimov. But these things have a funny way of working themselves out. Eddie Hearn spoke about Dimitri Bivol when he beat Canelo Alvarez, and obviously there was the talk of Canelo was going to just get past Dimitri Bivol, the big light heavyweight unbeaten light heavyweight champion, and then box Gennady Golovkin, and that didn't quite work out. And some people are drawing some comparison to Crawford versus Madrimov this weekend. It's not a fight that Crawford can take his eye off, but also not one that you'd expect him to.
No, he's not that bloke, is he?
No.
I don't really ever expect that to happen with somebody like him, because I don't think he's probably ever been out of shape a day in his life.
No.
You never see pictures of Terence Crawford in between fights looking like he's in anything other than fighting weight. If he had to fight the next day and make his whatever his weight limit of the time was, you feel like he'd be able to do it. Get the skipping rope out, get the sweatsuit on, and good to go. He's one of those guys. I always find the kind of dynamic around these fights quite interesting, because people will talk about how there's no pressure on Madrimov and all this kind of thing. And that's how we look at it, because we don't think he's going to win. He doesn't think that. He does think he's going to win. But still, finding yourself in that situation will be an interesting one, because you'll know that all the talk is about him. You'll know that in that sense, all the pressure is on him. But you can use that, to kind of engender your own sort of siege mentality, if you like, put that chip on your shoulder and use it, because you will be aware that people think he's going to win, and it can become a case of, well, I'll show you how wrong you are. I think he's going to give a good account of himself. I don't see any other eventuality there with Madrimov. But I just feel like with somebody like Crawford, I'm not sure exactly how you prepare for someone like him, because I think he's always going to end up being better than you think he is, even though you already think that he's going to be very good, because you can't ever overestimate somebody mentally, not too much, because it's not going to do you any good in the long run. You can't go in there with any kind of hesitation or any lack of decisiveness, basically. But I do feel like it's likely you will get a surprise when the bell goes, and not the kind of surprise that you want, because he really is that good.
Looking at Crawford's resume, and it's something that we've discussed on here plenty of times. is this hardest fight of his professional career? I think it's safe to say that the Errol Spence fight is certainly the defining fight in his career, and the biggest fight of a decade at welterweight, and that will be the one that he's certainly remembered for. You would expect. I mean, kind of at this point, certainly. But is this the toughest fight of his career? He's up in weight. He's become it's his 4th weight class now. Started down at lightweight. You're looking at it. Errol Spence, Avanesian, Sean Porter, Kell Brook, Kavaliauskas, Khan, Benavidez. This feels like, in my opinion, the toughest fight of his professional career, Crawford.
I don't think that people will look at it before the fight and think that it is, but they may well look at it after the fight and realise that it was. Because, as you say, that there are certain things that you can never ignore, or that you ignore at your peril, and that shouldn't be underestimated. And moving up in weight is one of them. Because, in a sense, people are kind of looking at it and thinking, well, he's going to fight Canelo at 168, so moving up to 154 is no big deal. Moving up to 154 is quite a lot. It's half a stone. Yeah. It's a big jump, and you don't really know how you're going to wear that until you do it. So I feel like maybe people are slightly underestimating it at the minute, but possibly after the fight we'll look at it and think, yeah, that was an ask, and that was a hard fought win. And that will maybe make him think again before doing what Charlo did and jumping up another 14 pounds and boxing Canelo. Although I wouldn't have thought it would stop him doing it if he beats Madrimov, but it's tougher than maybe we expected it to be, because Canelo's the fight, isn't he? Canelo's the fight. But with all of these cards that they put on the Riyadh season cards, as you say, there have been quite a lot of things that have happened that we've not really expected to happen. So, and that's great, isn't it, for as a promotion to have that kind of vibe around you, whereby people are half expecting something strange to happen, whether it's in that fight or one of the others. It's a good thing. Yeah,
absolutely. We all love a surprise here and there. But yeah, just touching on what we said about Madrimov being his toughest opponent, I think it's getting that balance, isn't it, between picking Crawford to win because Crawford's great and whatever else, but then you see people who are writing Madrimov off that, if Crawford wins, he deserves a tremendous amount of credit. If you're writing Madrimov off as a walkover and, people referring to him as a Euro bum, even though he's Asian.
That's absolutely absurd.
It's again, it's a specific subsector of the boxing community. God. Then you're surely robbing him of warranted praise if he does a job.
What is good then?
Exactly.
What is good?
Jumping up and beating a much bigger, naturally bigger.
With respect to Julius Ndongo, is beating Julius Ndongo to become undisputed super lightweight champion? Is Julius Ndongo better than Israil Madrimov? No, he isn't.
No, and that's kind of where it's interesting to see kind of how people are perceiving this fight beforehand. So I think Madrimov is very much live. But okay, before we move on and sticking with Bud Crawford and Israil Madrimov, obviously a lot of talk in recent months about the much vaunted pound for pound list. We've seen Inoue and Usyk stake their claim in recent months. If Terence Crawford destroys Israil Madrimov in 4 or 5 rounds and becomes a 4-weight world champion, of course, after picking up titles at lightweight and being undisputed at 140 and 147, is that enough for him to disturb the top 2 to become pound for pound number 1 in your eyes, Andy?
For me, no, because I don't. Until he retires, for me, I think it will always be Usyk, because he beat somebody and has regularly who's like 40 pounds heavier than him to become undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. I forget what Tyson's weight was exactly for that fight, but
it was a lot more than what
Usyk was 223, and Fury was it high 260s, I think, something like that. And anyway, it's obviously, if you're boxing in those other weight divisions, you don't get the opportunity to do that. You have to be at heavyweight. But if you're talking about pound for pound, then the man who packs the biggest pound for pound punch, he was literally punched above his weight in a way that none of the others will ever be able to, is Usyk. I don't think he can be dislodged, having beaten Fury to become undisputed heavyweight champion, given that Fury is so much bigger than him.
Yeah, I think I'd probably agree. And
really good as well. Let's not forget that about Tyson Fury.
He's not just big.
Yeah, it's not David Hay Nikolai Valuev. Yeah. Amazing though that was, because he was 99 pounds heavier. That was an astonishing thing to watch. But Usyk's win against Fury was just, it was incredible, really.
It's difficult, isn't it? You sort of when you're looking at Inoue and Crawford, it is going to take something very, very special. It's going to take, in my opinion, Crawford beating Madrimov and then jumping up to beat Canelo. If he was to do that,
if he beat Canelo, then that's
yeah, because you've essentially done the same thing.
Like, I'm contradicting myself now, saying that he couldn't possibly rival it. But if he could beat Canelo, but I just don't think he can, because it'll be too much.
Yeah,
if he beats Madrimov and jumps up and fights Canelo, then of course he's got to take the fight, because it's a massive fight. But I don't like to see people lose just because they've gone too far up in weight. What does it really mean? And it wouldn't mean anything to me for Crawford's kind of legacy. People are talking about legacy. Were he to lose to Canelo, for me it would just be this kind of outlier of a fight that, well, what did you think was going to happen? Of course he's going to lose.
Yeah. Okay, elsewhere on the card this weekend, there's plenty of boxing, there's plenty of action on the Saudi show this weekend. Andy Ruiz, the return of Andy Ruiz, the first time in almost 2 years, as he takes on Israil Miller in a clash of the ages between two very, very large men. Andy, we do love it when those large men come together. It's a really interesting fight, isn't it? We don't really know where Andy Ruiz is at. Whereas I think with Israil Miller, obviously we've seen a little bit of him. We saw him against Daniel Dubois. He's still a handful. He's still a very big man who can go for 10 rounds. We don't really know what to expect from Mr. Ruiz, do we? It's been a while since that Luis Ortiz fight, which was a fight that he won basically by the knockdowns and didn't do an awful lot else in. What are we going to see this weekend? That's a really fascinating fight to me.
I don't really know, is the honest answer. We know where Israil Miller is and what he does and what he will try and do. And he's absolutely massive. And he will ask questions of you. Andy Ruiz is... I just feel like he's been unified heavyweight champion of the world. And that night in Madison Square Garden was one of the wildest things I've ever seen live. It was absolutely monumental.
It's an amazing night.
It was incredible. It was just you were there as well, of course. And it was absolutely, it was just carnage, wasn't it? Everybody on their feet just watching this thing unfold that nobody thought would happen. And just since then, really, and I understand how it happened. He lost his way when it came to the rematch, lost the fight, didn't give himself as much of a chance as he should have. And I think he'll always regret that, because you talk about controlling the controllables. And what you can control is turning up to the gym and doing some training, which I think for long periods is something he didn't do. Hence he weighed in stone heavier for the second one than he did for the first one. But that's been and gone now. And since then, at various intervals, we've heard all about him knuckling down and all the rest of it and wanting to regain the heavyweight titles. You'll see the odd kind of picture taken of him in the gym from an angle that seems to show that he's in incredible shape, and you'll see it on Twitter or whatever, like, look at the shocking new photos of Andy Ruiz, and you think, wow, what's this? And then it's just like, he actually looked kind of okay. He's never going to be that, is he?
No.
That's not who he is. But he is a really good fighter. He's tough. He's got really quick hands. We know what he can do. It's just a question of motivation and application, really, with someone like him.
And you'd feel
if it isn't there, then Miller's capable of running him over.
I was just about to say, this is the fight that you would expect that to be really put to the test.
Yeah.
Because Miller is going to be there in your face for 10 rounds. I think it's 10 rounds, 10 or 12 rounds. And he's going to be forcing you to work. And if Ruiz, he had a 2-year break before the Ortiz fight as well. Against, it was 18 months before, after he boxed Chris Arreola in a fight where he didn't look great in, got hurt a few times in that fight. That was the slim Ruiz, wasn't it? He was 256 for that, down from 283 for the Joshua rematch. And everybody said, he needs to put the weight back on. Because every time Arreola touched him, he hurt him. And we spoke about this in the past, about how
it's a good fight for Ruiz, this actually, isn't it? When you think about it.
You really see where he's at, similar to how Daniel Dubois did.
If you do still want it, or rather, if you don't, then
you'll find out. And that's it was perfect in a similar sense of the Daniel Dubois fight was as well. It was kind of this is the guy who's going to test you for X amount of period of time. If you don't want it, you're going to lose.
Yeah.
And it is going to be really interesting, particularly as it gets to those later rounds of a fight where Ruiz hasn't been active. Certainly in the ring, he hasn't. We don't know what he's been doing in the gym. But that is a very, very interesting fight. And, I think if Ruiz wins that fight and looks good in doing so, you'd think with all of this heavyweight furor around everything in Saudi. I mean, there's big fights for Andy Ruiz.
Yeah,
he's well known over here.
Winner stays on. That's why at heavyweight particularly, those are great cards to get on full stop, obviously. But at heavyweight in particular, that's where the main focus is, and that's completely understandable because, as we said before, it's the glamour division, and if you put on a big card, then really you need some good heavyweight fights on it. If you're not headlining with one, you need at least one because that's just a fact of life, isn't it? And so to get into that mix, has he really done enough to deserve getting into that mix? Whether deserve's got anything to do with it or not really, who knows? Who cares? If you're him, you're in it, and if you win, then you'll get another big fight. That much we do know.
You could see if Joshua is able to get past Daniel Dubois, you could see Joshua Ruiz 3. That could make sense somewhere. Yeah, for sure.
People would love
that. They did that. You could do that in the UK. Obviously, had the first one in America, the second one in Saudi, you could do the third one in the UK or in Saudi or wherever. So, yeah, a lot on the line there. It's difficult to see where, perhaps not for Miller, but if Ruiz loses that, it's difficult to see where he goes.
Yeah, it is, because where's his motivation then, really? Because if he does lose to Miller, unless there are some strange circumstances with a clash of heads or something like that, then he will have lost because he just doesn't really want it enough anymore. And if that's the case, he'll already know, actually, and he'll be going into the weekend thinking, this is going to be hard work. And if that's the situation that he's in, then he'll probably know that it's time to hang them up. And hopefully he's held on to the majority of that money that he made against Joshua in the second fight. He won't have made loads in the first fight. He would have got well paid for the first fight, but he would have got really well paid for the second one. I hope he has, because you never like to see fighters just squander their money, although it's happened so many times, and he'll be able to just walk away with a few regrets, but who doesn't? But as a former unified heavyweight champion of the world, I mean, it's not sort of being undisputed. It's not possible to do any better than that. And as much as he might regret what happened in Saudi Arabia that night in Madison Square Garden, that's the one he wants to think about when he's in his retirement. Then never mind the rest. Just think about that, because it was so mega. But if he loses to Israil Miller, then he's, as a force in that division, he's finished, isn't he? Yeah, it would be very difficult to see where he comes back from. Staying with the heavyweight division, we are going to try and skate through just the last couple of fights that we're going to be previewing from this card. Fight that I'm really, really looking forward to in the heavyweight division: Jared Anderson against Martin Bakole. A legitimate matchup between two top 15, at worst, I think, heavyweights in Bakole and Jared Anderson. A very peculiar fight, I felt, for Jared Anderson to take. As we all know, Martin Bakole, people aren't queuing up to necessarily fight him. So to take a fight against Martin Bakole when you're Jared Anderson, seemingly on the cusp of world honours, says one of two things. You're very confident if you're Jared Anderson, or you haven't really looked into Martin Bakole besides the loss to Michael Hunter. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly. And that's possible. That's possible because, as we mentioned earlier on, there can be a slight propensity amongst the US fight fraternity to ignore lots of things that go on, and they'll have seen that he's lost to an American in Michael Hunter, and that's really all that they'll take notice of. But with Anderson, as you say, they've agreed to this. It's not Top Rank making this match, although you'd imagine they would have had a say in it. How much of a say, I don't really know, because with the way those cards are put together, it's kind of, you're made a really good offer and you pretty much take it, because why wouldn't you? But as Barry's been saying the last few weeks, this is kind of a classic Top Rank match, or it's got the hallmarks of it, a kind of match they'll make when they've invested in somebody, but they've just begun to wonder, or that fighter's given them reason just to kind of question that faith a bit, and they want to set you a challenge and see you respond, just to prove, okay, you are who we thought you were. You are going to go on to do what we think you are. Because there have been some danger signs with Anderson. And for me, the ones that I take most notice of are the ones outside of the ring rather than inside, because you're never going to be perfect inside the ring every time. That's just not realistic. But the mentality that you need at that elite level, it has to be so resolute. It has to be so unshakable. And what you do see people do sometimes, particularly if they're touted as the next big thing, and all of a sudden they start to feel the pressure, they hit the self-destruct, because it's almost like you are then giving yourself a reason or an excuse to come up short, rather than give it absolutely everything you've got, do absolutely everything right, and then if you don't manage to succeed and do what you want, have to face the unpalatable truth that it's because maybe you weren't quite good enough. If you come up short but you've got something you can reach for by means of an explanation, then that can make it a little bit easier to take. Some people, as weird as it sounds, can get a bit scared of success. I think that's where he is.
There was that brilliant clip, wasn't there, that went around of him talking to Roy Jones, where he starts crying and he says, "I'm only 23," and the pressure, and like as we often, as we know and we talk about quite often, as is often the case, fighters don't come from very kind of prim and proper and well-organised backgrounds. And all of a sudden you go from being, and this isn't just necessarily Jared Anderson talking about, you go from being somebody who doesn't have an awful lot and you're around some of the wrong people, to all of a sudden you're anointed as the next this and the next that, and you've got interviews this and money that, and you're going to be this, that and the other. It's quite the change. And it's one of the reasons why we always discuss about, prospects having to learn the lessons outside of the rings as well, where you've got people coming to you who are all of a sudden your best friend, and do they have your best interests at heart? And the issues that he's had outside of the ring have been serious issues. I'm just wanted to make sure that I've kind of got these right. He was arrested in November of last year for improperly handling firearms in a vehicle while knowingly under the influence. And then of March this year, he was charged with a 3rd-degree felony, and these are in different states as well, for fleeing a police officer in a 130-mile-an-hour car chase. Not really what you want to be hearing from kind of your blue chip early 20s prospect of any description, but obviously in the heavyweight division, you factor that into how the heavyweight division is unique in a lot of instances. We saw against Charles Martin, he didn't look his best that night, and I felt like he looked really gun shy since then against certainly against Riyad Mahrez, and it's just these little pockets of question marks have just started to pop up in the last year or so with Jared Anderson, even in less so, sort of 7 or 8 months. And we're now in a situation where we want to see something from him, and he's in with a guy who people do not want to fight. People do not want to fight Martin Bakole. Whether people can like or dislike Billy Nelson, shout out Billy, on social media and the way that he carries on, but the fact remains that Martin Bakole is an avoided fighter, and there's a reason why he's an avoided fighter. He's a big lump. He can punch with both hands. He's got good punch variety. He's fast. He's got decent chin. This is a real fight. I think Anderson is in trouble this weekend. I think if you go into a fight with Martin Bakole, one of the reasons why Michael Hunter, I felt, had a lot of success against Martin Bakole, you could sense from him immediately. That was not a week that was covered tremendously by an awful lot of people. It was at York Hall, it was a Cyclone show. And you could get this impression from him. He came over with Hasim Rahman, who obviously knows a thing or two about causing an upset in the heavyweight division. And you could get this feeling from him that he was going to come, and he had this brashness and this freshness about him that we kind of saw from Jared Anderson up until his last 3 or 4 fights. And I feel like he has shown some of the fragilities that if you've got those in you against somebody like Martin Bakole, he's going to have success and he's going to make you think about it. I think this is a fight really for Martin Bakole to win. And if Martin Bakole is half as good as Billy Nelson tells the world that he is, this is his opportunity. If he goes and he beats a young, unbeaten American heavyweight prospect in Jared Anderson, this could be what catapults him into, we mentioned earlier, that winner stays on. Obviously, he did a good job on Carlos Takam, but that's a Carlos Takam with respect to the end of his career. This isn't. This is Jared Anderson, who's, he's another one who's, I think he's a Riyadh seasoned ambassador of some description as well. So Turkey Al Sheikh and the Saudis are putting an awful lot of stock in him. If Bakole goes in there and does a good job on him, then all of a sudden he takes his place, right? And that's a huge carrot to dangle, and really an opportunity that Martin Bakole and Billy Nelson must have been... I
bet they can't believe it.
Yeah, must have been absolutely gobsmacked that they had this opportunity to box. That would be the name that you'd pick out, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You'd pick out the top guys and box for the belts and the money, but as far as kind of like a chess move, you want the young, unbeaten, next up, blah, 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 because he's not proven, and we saw against Charles Martin, he didn't like getting hit.
It doesn't get any better.
No, it's
for them.
perfect
It doesn't
if you're
get any
Martin
better
Bakole.
because, as you say, he's the next, being touted as the next big name heavyweight from the US, and it's not like there are many of them, but it's been decided that it's him, and he's looked really, really good at times. But there have been these alarm bells that we've heard ringing loud and clear. It could be that this is the time where Anderson will show us that actually he's reached that watershed moment himself, and he's buckled down for this camp, and he's made some changes, and he's decided that if he's going to really do this properly, then it all starts now. The people I was with when those things that you mentioned happened, I can't be hanging around with them anymore. I've got to make that split. I've got to give this everything that I've got for the amount of time that I'm in this for, and if that means making difficult decisions about disowning people, cutting myself off from people I've known for a long time, then that's what I've got to do. But Team Bakole will 100% be looking at this and just thinking, we are being underestimated, and this guy has got no idea what a massive mistake he has made. Because I genuinely, when they got the call for this, they would have just thought that all their Christmases had come at once. I mean, it's just, it beggars belief, really, doesn't it, in a way? If you're them, you'd just be thinking, because you're right, if you had to pick the ideal person to fight, it would be him.
Absolutely, yeah. And you think about, like we mentioned earlier on, the top rank, is this a top rank match? Is this not a top rank match? And obviously it's difficult to kind of decipher with the whole promotional setup with Turkey kind of sitting as overlord to the rest of the promoters. But I don't know. I can't see, and this is not certainly for me to second guess the much, much brighter boxing minds over at Top Rank than I. But I can't, if he was the next, if you believed he was the next, I can't see you being willing to have him box Bakole.
That's what makes me think that they have got their doubts, or if they don't have their doubts, then they are unhappy with the way that he has been doing things, Anderson. And this is their way of saying to him, listen, we might be beginning to lose a bit of faith in you. We just might be. So have this and show us that you are what we've always thought you are, okay? Because the way you've been carrying on, it's not good enough. You can't carry on like that in a build-up to a fight like this, or he will beat you, and then we'll have to see. So it doesn't mean they have necessarily lost faith in him, but it might be that they want him to think that they could have done something like that, because otherwise you wouldn't do this, I don't think.
Yeah, it's a very peculiar fight. I was very surprised to see Anderson take it, but we'll see this weekend. Final fight that we're going to preview in any sort of detail on the Saudi card this weekend is Cruz against Jose Valenzuela. The WBA Super Lightweight Championship on the line between two really aggressive guys. Cruz likes to come forward, put the pressure on, obviously look fantastic in dismantling Rolando Romero and picking up the title against Jose Valenzuela, who himself has been in good form recently, had those very, very impressive win. Well, the first fight didn't get the win over Chris Colbert, very controversial decision loss to Chris Colbert before, knocking him out in chilling fashion in December of last year. And this is a really, really good fight. Certainly a fight where we do see some upset potential. Cruz goes in a pretty sizable favourite with the bookmakers, but he has to be careful of discounting Valenzuela.
Yeah, he does. I quite fancy Valenzuela, actually. It's a really good fight, isn't it? It's you see it on the card and you think, oh, okay, yeah, I'll have some of that. Absolutely, sign me up for that. And that's kind of what you get when you look down these cards every time you see one, really, but particularly recently, because I think this one and the Wembley one, I think just really are very, very good cards. And this fight is a good example of that. It's one for us, isn't it? It's a trade fight. These are not guys who are big names outside of boxing, but you can't really see how it can miss, to be honest. as a spectacle.
Absolutely, and you've got the right styles for it as well. I think Israil Cruz is a little bit more of a plodder, comes forward, and he's more attritional, albeit he looked like he carried some power against Rolando Romero, whereas Valenzuela is a little bit looser and a bit more explosive as well. So it has all the hallmarks, really. I feel like Valenzuela will have to make an impression early. I think if Cruz can just walk through his punching power, then he may come into some problems in the second half of the fight.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
but again, it's that dynamic, isn't it, that we talked about before, where you feel like you do know what you're going to get to an extent. It's just a question of who can stand up to what, who questions are going to be asked and do people have answers.
Well, that's it. I mean, Valenzuela was written off. He got stopped by Edwin de los Santos, who is a very handful, he's a very capable fighter, a very handy fighter. Words out there, and then had the 2 impressive performances against Chris Colbert. So this is a real fight. I think he's been undersold a little bit by the bookies. A 3-1 underdog, Jose Valenzuela, for all of you degenerate gamblers out there. Gamble responsibly. Shout out Bet365. But anyway, before we wrap things up, let's look ahead to Barnsley this weekend. From LA to Barnsley, sounds like the back of a trotter van. But we have the return of Callum Simpson as the challenger for Zach Chelli's British and Commonwealth super middleweight titles. Good fight. Obviously, Callum Simpson, somebody who Boxer seemingly putting a lot of stock in. Of course, this is at Barnsley's stadium. So a lot, a sizable investment into the success of Callum Simpson against somebody who we know will come and bring it in Zach Chelli. Kind of know what we're going to get from Zach Chelli on Fight Night. It'll be up to Callum Simpson to really put his name in the sand, I suppose, as a genuine force moving forwards.
Yes, and you're right. They have a lot of belief in Callum Simpson, Boxer, and he sells lots of tickets because they sold this one out. I think it's 7,000, but they could have done more. He has that appeal about him. Definitely, it's where I'll be in the open air of Oakwell. I'm looking forward to it because it's a really good British title fight, and they are always worthy of headlining any show. And you look at Chelli and how he brings it, and fights he's had recently. Mark Jeffers could cope with it. Jack Cullen couldn't, for example. And I feel like when you're fighting Chelli, it's almost like there's a doorway there in front of you, and he is coming through that door. He's at the other side of that door, kind of like pawing at the canvas with his back foot. He's going to come flying through that door. His head might be up there or down there or over here, but that's where he's coming. And that's how Jeffers kind of boxed him. It was just like, okay, fine. And he coped with it, and he coped with it well, because whenever Chelli came forward, he hit him somewhere. He was nice and patient. He didn't kind of panic when you've got this tiger kind of springing at you and throwing punches and then ending up on your shoulder and the head coming in a bit low, and it's all just a bit frenetic and difficult to cope with. You can almost feel your pulse rate quicken as you're kind of talking about it, just thinking in my head about the prospect of having to cope with that myself, which isn't really relevant because I'm not a professional boxer. But at the same time, that's what he does. He tries to he's frenetic, and he tries to make you do that too. You've got to stay calm. And it'll be really interesting to see if Kim Simpson is able to do that, because everybody I've spoken to gives him a good review, Simpson. And I've liked what I've seen too, but this is a British title fight. It's a big test. He definitely can whack. He seems to be able to hit hard even when his feet aren't really set. But against someone like Chelli, I think your feet, ideally, they do need to be set. You don't need to be throwing bundles as he comes in at you. You just need to be picking a couple of good ones. I'm looking forward to it. And it'll be an interesting vibe between the pair of them too, because Simpson, he wears that kind of star status that the Boxer had given him, and we put plenty behind him on Sky too. He wears it well because he always comes to shows. He's always in the front row. He's always immaculately turned out. He's always available for a chat. If you want him to do a bit of punditry, whatever it is, he's yep, sure, I'll be there. What time? He gets it. But Chelli's really fun as well. He brings an intensity to Fight Week that I really, really enjoy. And he will be super confident that he can win.
He'll have his Mad Dad there, even though Mad Dad's now not in the corner. He's
true.
He's always an interesting addition to Fight
Week.
I
think that's a good move as well. Because,
you could tell last time out there it worked, didn't it?
Yeah, it did work. Barry O'Connell's very calm. He's not interested in any kind of attention whatsoever. but he still needs his dad there, Zach. And his dad wants to be around, and it's important that he's there. But it's a complex thing, isn't it? Father-son relationships in the corner.
Very much so.
It can go any number of ways.
But it's like Zach. This is we really will learn a lot about Callum Simpson. We'll learn more about Callum Simpson this weekend than we have done for the rest of his fights. If you look at Zach Chelli's resume, it's 15-2-1. As part of those 18 fights, he's boxed Umar Sadiq.
That was early doors as well.
Yeah, that was on the undercard of Johnny Garner against Gary Corcoran.
Oh, yeah.
Where there was the massive crowd trouble. I remember that, sort of ducking and diving. But yeah, Umar Sadiq, Cody Davies, Jack Cullen, Mike McGoldrick, Jack Kilgallen, Jermaine Brown, Anthony Sims Jr., Mark Jeffers, Jack Cullen, and Callum Simpson.
That is a real resume at a British title level, in and around British title level. Cody Davies was up at light heavyweight as well. And he put him down early in that fight. I went to that fight, put him down early in the fight with a lovely shot. I think it was an uppercut. Yeah. And Cody Davies, who's a really good fighter, spent a lot of time on GB, imposed that size and, correctly got the decision at the end of the 10 rounds. But that's why you have to love Chelli, because he will take big fights. Had a big win against Sims. He had that situation with Lerone Richards, which he found incredibly frustrating, exasperating, where the fight fell out late November 2022 at like 24 hours.
Yeah, it was just the day before the fight, wasn't it? He banged his head or something, Lerone Richards.
Yeah, and then he took that fight against Jeffers, and again, Heffron was supposed to be the fight, and then that didn't happen, and then he took Jeffers, who probably turned out to be quite a lot better than he thought he was. I'm really interested to see what happens with him next, because I think he could really, there's. I look at Jeffers and I don't see any discernible weaknesses, like particularly.
Jeffers against Callum Simpson.
Yeah, you can see that happening.
Yeah, really good fight.
But it was good to see Chelli still get that shot at the British title, despite the fact that he lost to Jeffers. Annoying though that was for Jeffers. He went off and got a win somewhere, I think, didn't he?
Yeah.
And then he got that fight in the end anyway.
Boxed Jordan Cranham. Just round things off this weekend. Really entertaining fight between Stephen McKenna and Joe Laws for the WBC Silver Super Welterweight title. It's the International Silver Super Welterweight title. That's got, I say, Barnstormer written all over it. That's going to be a lot of fun, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Absolutely it is, yeah. Because there's been plenty of chat between the McKennas and Joe Laws. And Joe came back and got a win against Michael Hennessy Jr., and then I felt like we were going to see him again on Sky after that. It's taken a little while, but it's a good fight. And Dubois in a really good fight too. Myra Moneo, when you're Caroline Dubois, people will just assume you're going to win, basically. Moneo's I like her when you watch her fight. She's got a bit of a swagger about her. She's well organised. She's experienced. She knows what she's doing. That is a hard fight. That is, I think, comfortably the hardest fight of. And Dubois has been matched pretty hard at times, but that is comfortably, I think, the hardest fight of her career.
I'm just having a look. Had a win over Erica Farias. Obviously, we know all about Farias over here. We see the return of Caroline Dubois against Myra Moneo as well. So that's all we have time for. We're going to run through very, very quickly, Andy, and we're going to do some predictions. We're going to do it using, of course, the Boxing News app. I'm not going to get the phone out because my phone's on flight mode because I'm a consummate professional. Now Barry's not here because his phone's always fucking going off. But anyway, it's all the work he keeps getting. It's people just inquiring as to whether or not he's free. Not free, but available. Put it that way. Right, okay, we're going to start in LA this weekend. I'm not sure how many fights we're going to have on the app, so we're just going to do a few and we'll see how we end up. We're going to start off with somebody we didn't mention, Andy Cruz against Antonio Moran.
Cruz.
By way of?
I'll say stoppage.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Antonio Moran is, just making sure, is known as the last man to be stopped by Devin Haney a few years back now. Andy Ruiz against Jarrell Miller.
Oh God, I really don't know. I'm going to say Ruiz, but tough.
Points.
Yeah.
I'm going to go for Miller points.
Yeah,
I can see it. I don't think it's in there anymore.
I can see it. I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't think there's enough in there really for Ruiz to really make an assault on the top end of the division. But he is tough. and he has got a lot of pride, and I feel like he might be able to hang in there and get it done. But he might walk away from it, even so, still thinking to himself, that was way harder than it should have been.
Yeah. Cruz against Jose Valenzuela.
I'm going Valenzuela.
Okay, I'm going to go for Cruz. Are you going to go by stoppage?
Yeah.
Ooh, okay, I'm going to go for Cruz by late stoppage.
Got to make some bold predictions.
There we go. Okay, right. Here's bold. Jared Anderson against Martin Bakole.
I've always fancied Bakole. And I will say Bakole, and I'll say stoppage again.
Yeah, I think Bakole by stoppage. And then, last but by no means least, Israil Madrimov against Terence Crawford.
Crawford points, but tough.
Yeah, I'll agree with you. I'll go Crawford points in a hard fight. I wouldn't be massively surprised if Madrimov wins. And I think if Madrimov does win, I don't think it's any real reflection on Crawford being this, that, or the other. I don't either. I think this is the hardest fight of Crawford's career, maybe by some distance. But I do expect him to win. I do expect him to be a hard fight though. And then he's working the show this weekend. Callum Simpson against Zach Chelli. I'm going to go for Callum Simpson points in a tough fight. I think the second half of that fight could be tough for him.
I think it will be a tough fight.
Yeah,
I think it will be a tough fight, and it's that kind of, Chelli is a here's what I do, you try and stop me kind of fighter, and it's hard to stop because for all the reasons we've mentioned, he's rugged, he's tough. He's physical. It's not always great to watch because it comes in fits and starts. It's a kind of a staccato fight, isn't it? Where it's kind of like reset, referee separates them maybe, then bang, in he comes, throwing a load of shots. And what do you do? It's hard. It really is. He's a hard night for anybody.
I think Callum Simpson will take a lot from it. I think it'll be one of those, a good learning fight this weekend in Barnsley.
I wouldn't be surprised by a Chelli win either.
Interesting. Oh, yeah. I think there's a few people out there who feel that way. I do feel like Simpson will get the job done. But yeah, I mean, this is the fight. We get to see where he's at. Certainly, this is the fight for this level of his career, where we'll see where he is and where he can move on from there. But that is all we have time for today on the Boxing Show with myself and Mr. Andy Clarke. Don't forget, you can catch up with us on most Mondays. Anyway, sometimes we even have a little bald Welsh fella here as well. But hopefully, he'll be back next weekend. Don't forget to let us know in the comments who you think wins this weekend and get those predictions in on the Boxing News app, available now in the Play Store and the Apple Store. Just download the app and we'll catch up with you next time.